Hello, everybody. Good morning, and thank you for joining Challenges of Getting Older, How Families Navigate the Tough Issues That Accompany Aging. I'm Nicole Young, the Marketing Coordinator for Private Vista, and your host for today. Before we get started, I just want to share a little bit about our firm. Private Vista is a financial planning and wealth management firm in the Chicagoland area. We work with approximately 1,200 households and manage about $2.1 billion of investments for our clients. We have offices in both downtown Chicago and Oak Brook. We specialize in working with business executives, business owners, retirees, families, women in transition, and qualified plans. Next up, I have just a few items on housekeeping for Zoom, just to ensure that you have the best webinar experience possible. You'll notice that you'll be muted for the duration of the presentation. That's just to ensure that you can hear our panelists clearly. But if you run into any technical issues, you may reach out to me, Nicole Young, by using that chat function at the bottom of your screen. Any chats that are sent will be confidential, but will only be seen by me for today's session. Lastly, if you'd like to submit a question during the presentation, please feel free to email me at info@myprivatevista.com. You'll also see it on my box throughout the webinar right next to my name. So just as a reminder, if you need to send any questions for our panelists, feel free to send those questions there. Now to get started, I'd like to introduce the two other folks who are on this call. The other box is on the screen. Private Vista partners, Jeff Toner and Mary Beth McLean. So I'll start with you, Jeff. Jeff is a founding partner and lead advisor at Private Vista. He's been in financial services for over 30 years and channels his time, talents, and energy between family, friends, clients, colleagues, and causes that provide a path for those without opportunities that he has been afforded. Jeff is a champion for SGA Youth and Family Services, a sponsor for Horizons for Youth, and president of the LaGrange Country Club. Thank you for joining us today, Jeff.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, Mary Beth, let's move on to you. So Mary Beth McLean is a partner and lead advisor at Private Vista as well. Mary Beth devotes much of her time to working with women, often in transition, to help them take control of their financial matters. In her free time, she loves to run, golf, read, travel, and donate her time as a board member for the Family Shelter Service, 100 Women Who Care, and the Elmhurst College and Community. Thank you for joining us today, Mary Beth.
Thank you.
All right, and without further ado, sorry, I was supposed to be on these slides here, but without further ado, I'd like to kick things off to Jeff to start the webinar.
Yeah, so thanks for joining today. And I thought I would start out with a little quote from an old baseball person, Mickey Mantle, said, "If I had known I would live this long, I would have taken better care of myself." So I think Mickey had a reputation of living pretty hard and drinking and smoking, and it did finally catch up to him. Mickey lived to age 64. So what's interesting when we look at this kind of quote and look at today's situation, I do think people really figured out how to get better care of themselves. And it's shown in some of the statistics that we'll go over with you today. You can just stay on that other slide. So, I think the issue is people are living longer. And as a result of that, other issues are starting to come into play, which we'll go through today. I thought I would start with a little bit of a success story, just to say, because I think when we go through what we're going to go through today, you're going to see that often this can be a challenge to have, conversations and work with parents or parents working with children on this topic. But I think if done correctly, it can really work out well. I have a client who just passed away earlier this year. Probably have been working with them for 25 or 30 years. And he really bought into the whole idea of having a plan and communicating the plan and getting the family involved. And so over those years, he found a way to have conversations with his children. He could express what he wanted and why he wanted it. The children felt involved with the process. late in his life, the last year or two, he did need the children to step in and help. And they were not only very willing to do it, but they were also very informed about what was going on. And the whole estate settlement process, I can tell you, also has been very smooth and seamless. So I do think if done correctly, this can be something that actually brings families closer together, and as can be seen as something that is really a positive and not a negative. So with that, I'm going to have Mary Beth cover some facts and figures about where we are today.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Nice to be with you. But as Jeff already pointed out, people are living longer. The life expectancy for women and men has grown by almost 2 decades over the last half century. And right now, there's 85.5 million people. 55 are projected to double to be 65 by 2050. So, and some of the reasons that that's happened are medical advancements. For example, antibiotics have only been around for just a little under 100 years. And there's also public health improvements, clean water, sanitation, and even the fact that we wear seatbelts in the car every day is something that is, a new event. And because we are living longer, as Jeff pointed out, it's great to be living longer, but that means that there's other things and other challenges that we face.
So, yeah, let's talk about the positives, really. I think in a way, when we talk about aging, often there's a certain kind of negative connotation to aging. I've always been kind of a half full type of person. So I look at it as a very positive thing. One of the obvious results of living longer is you have more time. And so with more time, and it could be compared to the 50s and the 60s, we might have 20, 25 years extra to live. So there are all sorts of examples out there today of what people are doing with that time. We had a good friend that just did a 3-month hike from Spain down into Italy. And I think he's 70 years old. There are people going back to school. There are people that are, becoming authors. So there are a lot of positive aspects of having more time, and especially having more time in a sense when maybe some of the main responsibilities you had in your midlife of raising families and working, as some of those things dissipate a little bit, you can decide really what to do with that time and channel that into maybe some new things or new people that you haven't had a chance to before. So on the positive side, though, it's a new opportunity. On the negative side, which we'll go through a little bit more in detail, obviously there's a physical part of this. There's a mental part of this, which I'm going to suggest to you might be the harder issue in here. And then there's just some of the financial implications of if you need money to last 30 years after you retire, the pot of money or the lifestyle that you have, you need to make sure that you've thought about that as well.
So as we age, there's the thing that we have to deal with, and the conundrum is that parents don't want to burden their children and they want to stay independent. Because we have this extra time, we want to be able to use it the way that we want to use it. And children have not planned on becoming responsible for their parents. If you are of the age where your kids are now parents themselves, that they're busy raising their families. So, and they don't necessarily have the time or energy to help care for parents. The sandwich generation is very real. Roles reverse, and often it happens gradually. It might be that all of a sudden you're finding that you're letting your kids do more for you, or you find that you need some help doing things that you did easily several years ago. So those are the questions that we are going to talk about today. And one thing to remember regarding children, as it says on the slide, that there are more children that are going to need to provide financial assistance to their parents.
So we're gonna peel the onion back here a little bit more and just try to look at, you know, the issues that come along with aging. And we purposely started with this one because I think it's the one that probably gets the least amount of attention, and it probably is one that is the undercurrent of most of the difficulty, in a sense, of the aging process, and it's the emotional aspect of it. So if you're like me, I mean, I don't wake up every morning and say, you know, how many days do I have left on this earth? You know, but as you get older, it is much more in your face, in the sense that you do know that you're older, and you do know that, in a sense, people don't live forever. So the reality is you become more face to face with your own mortality. And a lot of times, you know, that becomes just an overall, in a sense, sadness that you have to figure out a way to deal with that, you know, when it comes to your own situation. But it's a real emotion that people, you know, have to deal with. The other aspect of it, you know, and we've seen this not only with our own clients, but in our own personal situations, is Mary Beth used the word about being independent. We're using the word losing control. You know, the reality is, just as when you were a child and you needed help, you know, on the back end of life expectancy, the odds are probably you're going to need help as well. And so certain things start to happen where you can't do it yourself. And I've seen it personally where it becomes almost a point of being angry. You know, you're angry that you can't do it. You're mad that you can't do it. And you don't really even understand that. But the fact of the matter is, someone who was independent for 75 or 80 years all of a sudden starts to need other people's help. And that can be a source of frustration for people. The other reality is, you know, that you do lose very important relationships in your family. You know, so obviously it could be a key relationship, such as a spouse. It could be people in your family, you know, siblings, your children, you know, friends. But the reality is, if you're in your 80s, you are probably being surrounded by health issues of other people, obviously being surrounded by people passing away. And it's just a reminder, you know, day in and day out, of the fact that things are changing, and relationships that you counted on are fading away. And so there's a certain amount of sadness that comes as a result of that. And it's just all part of the package, so to speak, that we have to navigate and mitigate, you know, as we're dealing with people, you know, in that situation. And the last one I kind of covered under the loss of control, but, you know, most people just like to be independent and don't want to need help. And so it's coming to grips with the fact that you do need help, and it's okay that you need help. So that's the first part.
Next part is physical. And, you know, as we age, our bodies that were able to do things in our 20s and 30s are not, either, if we are doing them, we're probably not doing them to the same level of competence, and we're not enjoying it as much. So, you know, frequent doctor visits, mechanical parts of the body begin to fail. I know personally 2 friends that have had hip replacements this year, and and it's going to continue. The good news is that we do have the medical technology to help us in some of these physical frailties that we start to experience, but it's the process that begins. And the mental acuity also starts to decrease. The ability to remember, manage multiple tasks easily. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've said, I don't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. So, but as we age, we can recognize that and know that there's other ways that we can get help. I know that losing the ability to drive, when we took the keys away from my dad, that was very, very hard for him, but it was the right thing, not for just his safety, but for everybody else's safety on the road. And you also may need to reconsider where you live. If you have a home that has, if it's a bi-level, for example, or a lot of stairs, it may not be safe. If you have to do a lot of shoveling in order to get your car out of the garage when the winter comes, that may not be the same residence that fit you for so long. It might be needing a change now. So all of these are factors that as we age, you have to take into consideration.
Can I add one thing to that slide?
Absolutely.
I'll just tell you a personal story. My parents, I grew up in Philadelphia, and my parents moved to Florida in their early 60s. And so they lived there for a lot of years together. My dad passed away about 8 years ago. And so my mom was in Florida basically on her own. And so the challenge, there's 5 kids in my family, but the 5 kids, like a lot of people in the US now, spread out. So I have a brother in Connecticut, a brother in Philadelphia, a brother in Georgia. I'm in Chicago. I have a sister actually also in Chicago. But the reality is we weren't in the same neighborhood anymore. And so we started to try to figure out, well, how do we, this first item really was the one that made us make a decision. My mom was starting to say to me, hey, I need to go to the doctor. I need to do this. And then I would say, what did the doctor say? And she'd say, well, I don't really remember. Or, I'm not going to do what he told me to do. So, here I am 1,000 miles away trying to manage the process. And so really what it drove us ultimately to do, which was number 4, was to have a conversation with her saying, it's really difficult for us to help you. We can't go to these various doctors' meetings, and get on a plane for a 20-minute meeting. So after a few conversations, we ended up bringing her back up my way. And so it's a real issue now, though. Like, we literally go to every doctor's appointment with her. And we're really her eyes and ears because she's not able to really retain, what is being told to her. So these things do change, but I think the idea is sometimes one of these issues may cause a change to another issue as well. Okay, so let's go on to the other issue that really we have to deal with is just the financial. Now, what I would suggest to you is all of us are probably always working on, where am I? What do I need in order to be financially independent? Do I have enough money, to be able to retire? And embedded in that question, so to speak, is, retirement over a period of time, and understanding that maybe things will change over time. So as part of this conversation, really the first step just needs to be, where is a parent relative to their assets and their needs? And then the second part of that would be to ask the question is, what happens if mom or dad needs, in-home care? What happens if you need to go into a life care community? So some of these are, basic, I need enough money in order to be able to afford to retire. But the second question really is more of a what if. if something changes, how does that change my financial picture? So the idea here is to really understand and address those questions. And whether the answer is, a good answer or a bad answer, it's always better to understand what it is so that there's no surprises if something were to happen. The last two bullet points really speak to, what we see often is that as people age, or what we see as often is if the primary financial person in a relationship passes away, the non-financial spouse may not have the background, to deal with, checkbooks or investments or, filing tax returns or filling out medical insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the reality is you need to understand who's going to be involved, who's going to be aware of your situation, and in essence, come up with a plan, before any of this happens so that, you at least understand kind of what happens if this happens. We often, too, the last part, which we can cover a little bit later in more detail, but it is often not just the family that you need. So you're going to need, a child or somebody in that situation to be kind of your eyes and ears, but often you'll have other people involved, whether it's people like us, whether it's accountants, attorneys, that will also be there to help, through the process. So some will be family, some will be outside of the family, but there are, in a sense, you need to organize the resources and the people in order to, address this issue. Okay, the last one is legal.
So basically, one of the things that you have to ask yourself is, do I have the right documents and the right people in place? Jeff already referred to having a team, but I'm going to go into just some of the basic documents before we talk about how to get these documents if you don't have them. And the first is a will. And that's just a basic, but it's amazing to know how many people out there do not have a will or a recent will. They may have done it 15, 20 years ago, but it hasn't been updated. In some cases, you might need an estate plan because you want to have trust put in place. There should be estate documents. There should be a health power of attorney, which is the person that can make decisions for you medically in the event that you are incapacitated. And that's also, you want to make sure that you've got the right people to make those decisions, because they have to be people that you trust and know that they have your welfare in mind. And then the third is the property power of attorney. In the event that you become incapacitated, do you have somebody that can step in and help pay the bills, kind of review things, and just kind of take over for you financially? And that doesn't have to be a long-term thing. It could be just simply that you're going in for surgery and you know that you're going to be laid up, like going back with the hip issue. I know that generally they send you to rehab for about a week or so. So it's just having those basic documents in place. And as Jeff already alluded to, part of the team of people that you can help get you those documents are a financial advisor, an estate planning attorney, and even your accountant can weigh in on some of the structure for your estate plan. So that's the first and most important thing. And if you don't have those documents, let's get that started. Then what changes legally is my health changes. If you become incapacitated, you're not going to be able to act for yourself. So again, that's why that health power of attorney and that property power of attorney become critical. And then, do I need to educate people on what the plan is before they're needed? Yes, we say yes, because as we've already talked about, the idea is having a plan so that if things happen or when they do, that you have everything set so that there's no surprises. And then one thing you have to consider is, do they have the right skill sets? So if you're having a child get involved in your finances, you have to have a high level of trust, and they have to have an idea or an understanding of how things work. So one thing that you need to do is kind of have a very candid conversation with that person, but also kind of understand from yourself, who is it that you want to have surrounded around you that you know have their best interest at heart.
Yeah, and I think Mary Beth and I on that particular issue, we've talked about sometimes the right person may not be the oldest person in the family, and so some of that needs to be worked through, as you kind of work through this process. So just something to think about.
And I would also say that if you are the person in the family that is chosen, that is an honor and a privilege, but it's also a responsibility. And conversely, if you're not the person, that doesn't mean that you're thought of any less of by your parents. It's just that they may have a skill set that you don't have. And so because you don't want to become defensive, because that's when resentment among siblings can start to arise.
All right. So we've kind of, I think, built the foundation of, the fact that people are aging, the fact that there's, multiple levels of issues that people are navigating through as they do age. But, I think one of the realities is, okay, what do we do about it? And how do we handle this? Because that's really, I would say, in my years of, practicing, this is the challenge. How do you take this? I think rationally, we all understand that we all age, that we all might, need some help along the way. We haven't been through this before. So how do you figure out what the right answer is for your situation? And there's this taboo in our society, both ways. Children are really uncomfortable bringing it up to their parents, and parents a lot of times are uncomfortable bringing it up to their children. So, more often than not, we're left in this situation that it doesn't get talked about. And I think Mary Beth and I would agree that in essence, when it isn't talked about, is probably when most of the problems, most of the situations that we hear about among family and family members, it's because there's been really a lack of a plan and a lack of a communication. So what we're going to try to cover in the next few slides is how do we go from understanding the issue to now having a conversation so that we can make some progress, make some plans, and in a sense, try to improve or increase the probability of a good outcome relative to this process.
So as we've talked about, we all agree that no one wants this conversation, and yet it does need to happen. So we say that, the when, we have found with our clients that most of the time it's not occurred early enough. So don't wait too long, but talking sooner rather than later gives everybody time to deal with the issues and avoid mistakes. So I know in my situation, when my dad passed away, and it's been quite a while now, almost 20 years, but it's one of those things that, we didn't talk about it. And they made decisions, they being my mom and dad, about who was going to do what, that were never talked about until after he basically passed away. So, and there were some things that probably could have been better handled than they were. But so it went smoothly, but there were things that needed to be addressed. And it was some of the mechanics about who the beneficiaries were, how things were titled. But having that conversation sooner would have been a lot better for everybody.
The second part of that is the why. So I think, we all have this hesitation to have the conversation, but let's look at it from the other perspective and say, why should we push forward? Why should we try to make this happen? And my experience has been, and my reason to push forward, and the way I would present it if I was trying to present this to a parent would be, the reason I want to have this conversation because I want you to have more of a say in your future. If we wait too long, some of the, if you're in the hospital and I'm saying, what do you want to have happen? Some of the options may be off the table already. So in a sense, the reason that we want to have these conversations sooner than later is because it will allow you, to craft what you want your future to look like, what you want, how you want things to be handled, and a chance for us to get as close to that as possible. The other thing, it just allows, it allows time. The sooner that you start this, so to speak, so if you started at, 72 versus 92, it allows for a certain amount of time to have conversation before that, in a sense, the house is on fire. So you can explore items, you can talk to other people, you could, do some research on some of the possibilities and the outcomes. So the why to do it is because at the end of the day, it will allow persons that are aging to have more of a say and more of a ability to craft what their future looks like.
I guess the next question and the hardest is, how do you start this? It can be started by the parent, and I would say that that's generally a better option, because the parent, again, it goes back to, as your parents age, they're dealing with their own mortality and they want to also stay in control as well as being independent. So it is best to be started by the parent, but I have found, and I think Jeff is also the same, that it's usually started by the child, because as a parent ages, the child sees things that might not be not appropriate, but just are uncomfortable because they don't think that they're necessarily staying on top of things. So it might be that they realize that their parent forgot to, missed a bill for the mortgage or something like that. And I think that even though it's best to be started by the parent, if your parent hasn't had that conversation with you, then as a child, we do recommend, again, having that conversation earlier is always better for all the parties involved.
So let's even get into more practical aspects. So on the next slide, here's, if the child needs to start this conversation, you're going to be in one of two places. There's no pressing health issues, or there are pressing health issues. So in a sense, you're going to have to take a slightly different tact depending on that. Obviously, it's at some level, if there's no pressing issues, it's easier, just because you have a little bit more time to allow these things to play out. But generally speaking, if there are no issues, the best way to approach this is to ask a lot of open-ended questions. What do you found to be the good parts of your retirement? What do you find worries you about the future? How have friends that handled some of these issues? What'd you like about what they did versus what you'd want to do? And then, in a way, what you're doing is you're getting them to start to think about these issues, getting them to start to, in a sense, narrow it or widen it, depending on what the issue is. And at the end of the day, obviously, as part of that conversation, one of the questions may be, would you like to spend a little bit more time in trying to figure these things out, so that not only it's clear to you, but it's clear to us exactly what you want. So that's the approach we would suggest if there's no pressing health issues. If there are pressing health issues, you really don't have the luxury of time, to have long conversations, so to speak. So it needs to be much more practical. What do you want us to do now? What do we need to do today to help you through this? Do we need to take over this? Do we need to take over that? And then longer term, obviously, some of the things that Mary Beth already talked about, do you have these documents in place? What happens? Who should we talk to if for some reason you don't recover from this? So you're going to have to be much more direct, I would say, when there's a pressing health issue, and you don't really have the luxury of time to really let them, think it through, too quickly. I can tell you a case. This just came up this year. I had a good friend of mine call me and say, my dad is very sick, it's terminal, and we're concerned that his affairs aren't in order. So in the period of really 4 weeks, we got all the information. We looked at assets and titling and beneficiary designations. They had estate documents that were 35 years old. They had a couple of highly appreciated assets that would have large capital gains if they sold them. So in the course of 4 weeks, we did a complete redo, and rechanneled and got new estate documents, did all retitling, and he passed away literally 5 days after we finished. And so that was not, there was no room in there to say, well, here's option A and here's option B, which one do you prefer? It was really just put your head down and we'll go as fast as we can. And we hoped we wouldn't run out of time. So obviously dealing with these issues before there's serious health issues are much better. That's not to say when someone gets sick, you shouldn't, ask similar questions, but you just may not have as much time to do what you want to do in those cases.
I just wanted to add too, and you're dealing with the idea that you're losing somebody very special to you. So in this case, their father. So you've got the emotions that you're experiencing about losing somebody in your family, and you're having to deal with a lot of administrative issues,
Right.
kind of taking away time that could have been spent with the person that means a lot to you. So again, it's one of those things that if you can have that conversation, it's just better to do so. So the do's of the talk. Pick a time when you are all calm and rested. I would actually think that, having a conversation even in a neutral place, even if it's a restaurant, or if you want to use like the offices of one of the advisors on the team, whether it's a financial advisor, the accountant, sometimes having that third person in the room is very helpful because they're an objective party. Tell them generally what you want to discuss. You don't need to get into the details at that point. It shouldn't be about the money. It should be more globally about what they want and what their wishes are. The most important thing is to listen. I'm from a big family, and my mother used to say we had 2 ears and 1 mouth. So what do you think we should use more? And in this situation, it's even more critical because you have to hear what the person is saying, because sometimes, they just want to have somebody hear them. And then be gentle and empathetic. This is somebody that means a lot to you, and you're going to be there someday yourself. So it's just good to kind of put yourself in their place, understand what the emotions are that they're experiencing and dealing with. And it just would be a lot better for all. And then leave open topics for discussions. Jeff already had the open-ended questions about what to do when there aren't pressing health issues. But even in this situation, open-ended questions are much better because not only they're going to allow your parents to think about what it is, and you don't necessarily have to get the answer that day. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So if you're not going to resolve the issues and you're not going to have everything covered in that first conversation, but it's a process. So if nothing else, you're just letting your parent know that you really care, and if they need your help, that you are there for them. So, oh, we didn't, wait, can you go back, Nicole? Jeff was going to talk about the don'ts.
All right, the don'ts. So I think it's an interesting problem, as these roles start to change and reverse. And so we have to be careful. I think number 3 in the don'ts is probably should be number 1. Don't treat your parent like a child. I think at some level it's easy to fall into that trap, because when they get older and maybe they can't take the information in as quickly or can't process the information. I think the tendency sometimes is to take the short route and just say, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. So I think the first thing is don't treat them like a child. Don't really make decisions for them. I mean, I think we can give them information. We can give them, some guidance. At some point, and I've had this come up, at some point, those parents may come ask you, what do you think? But I think we want to wait until that is positioned like that. The other don't is don't be too quick with the answer or the solution. This is something, I look at this as kind of an evolution. It sometimes takes time and weeks and months to kind of let it work itself out and come up with a solution. So allow the time, if you're not under a time pressure, allow it just to kind of work itself through, and don't tell them the answer, so to speak. The other thing which Mary Beth and I have talked about is, the worst place to do some of this stuff would be at a family event. Family events should be about being together and having a good time. This is different than that. This is a very personal discussion. You want to, in a sense, allocate the appropriate time, the appropriate place, and in order to do that. And the last thing is, and it kind of falls under the, if you think you have the answer, and you even haven't had the discussion even with your parents, don't come over with the answer like, hey, I think I should be on your bank account, or I think you should move from here to there. So don't make it look like you already kind of predetermined what should happen. Just allow these decisions to be made over the appropriate amount of time. And when it's appropriate, you can do whatever needs to be done administratively, but don't come with the answer literally in hand with expecting kind of a sign off by your parents.
It should be collaborative.
Yep.
What the talk should cover. So we recognize that we're all going to go through this at some point. Aging is something that's going to happen to each and every single one of us. But you really just have to communicate to your parents that you're there to help, that you're another resource for them, and that you really are doing this from a place of love and concern, as opposed to that you really want to just take over. So again, as I said, it's got to be collaborative. If they recognize you as a partner in this process, as opposed to somebody that's going to take charge, it's going to go a lot better for everybody. And then the discussion of the needs and the goals. Probably the most important thing to spend time on is, what are their daily activities? How are they doing in those daily activities? And how are they going to be handled going forward? Jeff mentioned his mom. It was as simple as, I've got to get to the doctor. And she was going more often than she had been when she was younger, because as we age, physical issues do arise. So it's one of those things that if you can focus on helping them keep not just their daily life in place, but trying to be as independent as possible, they're going to recognize that you're there to help, as opposed to kind of either take something away or just take charge of your life. And then housing, medical, and financial, those are the three areas to concentrate on. You know, Jeff talked about his mom and dad having to downsize, excuse me, bringing his mom back up. My dad and mom had to downsize because when my dad got ill, he couldn't stay in that house anymore. So those, the medical and the financial too, are something that you have to consider. But I think that the housing probably, again, in terms of daily activities, is this a place that you're safe? Can you keep it up? And then if that's not the case, then we have to kind of figure out what the next steps are.
So let's go to the next. So, you know, we've talked about a lot of things up to this point, and this is there's clearly a softer side of helping a parent through the process, but there's also what I'd consider to be kind of a practical side. And so this is a very practical slide. So the slide basically is saying that to really do this well and to understand, not only for the parent and the children, that you basically need to have a financial plan of sorts in place. And it's pretty straightforward. We need to understand what the goals are and what you're trying to do. But we also need to understand, what do you have? You know, how does this work? We need to know what all the other critical documents are. But the last thing that we need to do is, in a financial plan, is we can say, here's what we think it's going to look like. But we also have to, in a sense, talk about or plan for as many contingencies as possible. So everyone's aging path is not going to look the same. And so, but we need to talk about what happens if one of the spouses pass away. What happens if one of the spouses need extra care? What happens if, you know, just the ebbs and flows of aging? What happens if we need to make changes? So part of the planning process is not predicting an outcome, but it's talking about the possibilities. And really, in a good financial plan, you know, you deal with what you hope is the path that is going to exist, but you also talk about a lot of the what ifs. What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? And in a sense, that's a critical aspect of planning, is preparing for things that may or may never happen. And so, but if they do happen, you know what you're going to do before that is going to happen. So it's in a way, it allows you to be clear, and it allows the family to understand your wishes. But it also should give people kind of peace of mind that you don't have to figure this stuff out on the fly. You've already kind of pre-thought about it, predetermined what the plan is.
So, I mean, anyway, so issues around the plan. The goal here again is, with your parents, you have to make it clear you're not there to take away their independence. The goal is to be prepared, as Jeff said, for the contingencies. What are your options that if you know that this might happen, what are, you know, it's like a flow chart, right? So if this happens, what are the two options that you have to deal with that situation? But again, the stress here is that you need to they need to understand that you're not there to challenge them, to, again, take away their independence, to, you know, take away some of the daily things that they enjoy, or to just all of a sudden be in charge of their lives. That's not what they want, and that's really not what you want to do either. So open communication is the key. You know what, having clear expectations about, or clear understandings about what they want to do, so that you can make sure that those are executed. That's really what we're trying to do here. And the motivation is love and desire to help. I go back to that whole, it's all about collaboration. If they know that you're there as their partner, as opposed to, again, somebody that's trying to just provide a solution and take full charge of everything, that's not going to go well. So I think if, again, everybody just can remember that, and again, that empathy, we should have an empathy tile up on the screen too. It's just really trying to understand where they're coming from, because again, the emotions of aging are something that they're dealing with, and they may not necessarily know what they want to do, but they need to understand that they have to start the process of beginning the discussion to form that plan to know what they want to do.
So kind of in summary, and then I think we have a couple questions, but we understand that this is not easy. We've been in the room often with families as they have these kind of conversations and talk about what they want, and we understand it's not easy. We understand sometimes the answers aren't clear, but what I would say that we have learned over the years is just ignoring it actually more often than not makes it worse. And so I think if you go with the right attitude, the right approach, it can be a very positive part of a relationship. And I think in the end of the day, having a plan, even if it needs to be modified as time goes forward, is better than just, in a sense, counting on reacting to the situation that comes your way. And at the end of the day, Mary Beth just said this, really done out of the right motivation and done in the right way, I think more often than not, it will be seen as a very positive thing. And not only will it allow your parents to kind of live the life they want to live, it'll also, in a sense, keep your life, if you're the child in this situation, it'll keep your life in balance, just because you've thought about who's involved, you've gotten to know some of the other team members, and you can lean on them. But the longer you work at this and the sooner you start on it, our experience has been kind of the better outcome typically that you will have. So that's kind of our prepared comments. Nicole, I'm going to turn it kind of back over to you.
I just wanted to say one thing to piggyback on your thoughts too. It's not just your current life that can stay in balance, but it's after your parent passes away, so that you can actually stay close to your siblings. If the parent is very clear about what they want to do with their assets and their financial plan, then it's going to be much easier when they're gone, so that there isn't the fighting, there isn't the conflict that can arise among family members as the parent is passed away. So so keeping your family intact even after the loss of a loved one is very important. So, and having that plan really goes a long way to help that happen.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Since it is almost 11, we don't have a ton of time for questions, but we were sent one that I think is really important to answer, and I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on this. So I think we'll just go with maybe one question, then we'll wrap up here. So Jeff and Mary Beth, the question is, I've already tried this. They're referring to, the plan, the talking to the family. So they've already tried this and it didn't work for them. What other suggestions do you have?
Go ahead, Mary Beth.
I guess the first thing I would say is, I'm not sure how it was done or if you did it over time, but if you tried it once and the conversation may not have gone well, I think maybe if you go back and look at how it was done, if you did it at a family event, or if you went over and had a conversation and said, this is what we're going to do, as opposed, so you're dictating as opposed to having a discussion. So, and there are some resources, but before we get to the resource, I want Jeff to chime in too. But again, this is a process. It may take a good year for everything to come into to be really settled and for them to feel comfortable. And I guess the last thing I'll say is don't make it about the money too. I mean, I've had clients where I say, you can let your kids know kind of what you want without necessarily letting them know the level of assets that they may or may not receive after you've passed away. So Jeff, your thoughts?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I listen, there's no secret sauce. There's no secret word to use to do this. I understand that, you know, family relationships and parent-child relationships, you know, are different, you know, among different situations. But at the end of the day, this is just something that we know that the better outcomes come from having some kind of dialogue, some kind of conversation. And we covered this in a couple slides. What I would encourage, first of all, is I think parents should be the one to really do this. It's much easier as a parent to go to a child and say, you know, I'd like to share with you or talk through this. We also know that doesn't happen as often as it should. So we've spent a fair amount of time talking about it if you're from the child's perspective, what you should do. But at the end of the day, I think there are a lot of resources, and Mary Beth is going to share a few of them. There are a lot of resources you can use if you think this is the time to do this, where you can become better educated before you have these conversations. And they not only talk about the process, but they talk about, you know, the emotional side of things. So if you really think it's time to have it, you know, I would invest in a little bit of education and resources to kind of get yourself better prepared.
And to Jeff's point too, I mean, having that conversation as the parent or initiating it, if you're the parent that's out there listening to us today, I would say if you've got a financial advisor, if you have an accountant, sometimes it's easier for that person to talk to the family with, again, having a third party in there, and it might be help facilitate your conversation. So I know that I've been involved in those conversations, and I know Jeff has too. So sometimes if that's something that's uncomfortable, reach out to your team because they would be willing to help you with that. And I just wanted to point out some of the books that Jeff and I both have read as we were researching for today. The books are up on the screen. We would highly recommend them. And then I also wanted to suggest Aging Care Connections. It's an organization in the southwestern suburbs of Chicago, and it's a great resource. They can provide information. If you need resources, they can help you find those. Or again, they're just a great depository of resources and information. So we have their both the website as well as their phone number up on the screen there. So I'm going to say thank you for being with us this morning, and happy holidays. Jeff?
Same. You know, it's an important issue. We all have to deal with it. So, you know, if we can be of help in any way, let us know. But I would encourage everybody to, you know, think about this, how it relates to their own situation, and in essence, figure out what the, you know, the next step is. So thanks for joining, and have a nice holiday season.
Everybody, thank you.